So here you are in the interview, putting your best foot forward, being thoughtful, being creative with your answers, being respectful, maybe a bit too respectful to the interviewees that are speaking with you. But
Hmm.
there are these things that are holding you back from actually moving forward in the job process. And that, my friends, is what we're going to talk about today on the Underdog Leadership Podcast. My guest today is Allison Fuller. She is one of the co partners in Envision Consulting. We're going West Coast. Underdog Leadership Podcast goes West Coast to LA. And I am absolutely delighted to have her here. Welcome, Allison.
Thank you very much for having me.
Cool. So, um, tell us about you. Tell us about what you do during your day. And let me start there. Let me pause, Jenny. Tell us more.
Thank you. So, my name is Allison Fuller, and I am the co partner and managing partner of Envision Consulting. We're a nonprofit consulting firm based, as you said, out of LA. And I have the insane privilege of working with mission-based organization on big strategic initiatives. So we do executive search in the C-suite. We do strategic planning, and we do mergers and acquisitions. So we have a team that is both local in LA. We also have team members in Lexington, Kentucky, is our newest office, Denver, and in New York. So we're branching out a little bit every day. So every day for me is totally different.
Okay, that was my next question. Like, what's a typical day? Like,
I have two smallish children. I have two daughters, 6 and 12. So my day always starts, with them and their day. But every day, like I said, is a little different. Today it was about board member recruiting. This afternoon I have CEO interviews, and then I'll, have the opportunity to sit down with some funders after I finish my interviews today. So every day is just a little different.
wow, wow, that's amazing. And it sounds very diverse. It sounds like you do a lot of different things. Am I right about that?
Yes, every engagement is its own beautiful snowflake.
I love
So
it.
many different things.
So our this conversation came up because I was a guest on Matt's podcast. So just full disclosure there, and it's a great conversation. And the title of your organization's podcast is Nonprofit on the Rocks, which I just love. And so we had a great conversation, which we can go over on wherever you get your podcasts and have a listen. But Matt said something just in passing that really piqued my interest. He said something how women often sabotage themselves in interview situations and that I should check out or talk to Allison about that. So that's the core of our topic for today, Allison. Set
Mhm.
the stage for us. What happens or what do you see? And you do this every day, right?
Mhm. So first of all, like I'm coming to this conversation with the benefit of having been a panelist just last week in New York for women of color in fundraising and philanthropy, uh, working mostly with nonprofit executives who are women of color trying to work up into this position. And they had a wonderful speaker and wonderful panelists, and I think the number one thing that women do is that they discount themselves before they even get to the stage. So, we have, even though nonprofit industry is heavily female, women have a threshold, an internal threshold that they want to meet about 80% of the job qualifications. There's been studies on this before they will apply for a job. And so they don't even, the first way that people sabotage themselves, that women sabotage themselves,
Mm-hmm.
is by saying no before they even get to the stage.
Hmm. So, do they say no, it's too much pressure right now in my life? Do they say no, I don't have the qualifications? Do they say no just because they can't think about it? They don't have time?
No, I mean, in general, they look at job descriptions and qualifications far more carefully than their male counterparts.
Right.
And so I was having a conversation with this about one of my recruiters yesterday, and she said, I started pressing on a male candidate and saying, have you done these things A, B, and C in the job listing. And he was very confident and said, well, no, I haven't done those things, but I have this similar training and I'm sure it'll be fine. And I'm a fast learner. The level of confidence in which
Mhm.
he answered that question was a
Mhm.
little funny to us. But
You took
similarly,
it, but you took it, right?
you,
You sort of saw
right.
it at face value and you moved. He addressed it, Allison, right?
Yeah, I mean, he wasn't evasive about it. He was very straightforward. Nope, but didn't see that it had been a problem. I mean, and for us, it had not been a problem. Like we had moved him forward to an interview based on that resume. In my panel last week, I had asked several women had actually come up to me and had asked me about applying for, chief development roles or chief program roles. But I was looking at their resume, and what I found myself saying more often than not was, why are you not applying for CEO? Why are you looking for a lateral move? Why are you looking at this path versus, and for the vast majority of them, they said, well, never even crossed my mind to look at CEO roles. Like, of course, I'd like to be a CEO in 5 years, in 10 years. And as somebody who writes these job descriptions, I was sitting across from them saying, no, no, like you could apply now and be a serious candidate. And women just are very serious about job descriptions. They're very serious about qualifications, and they just won't apply if there's a piece of it that they're unsure about. Whereas, as I mentioned, a male counterpart will roll right past that question. No, I haven't done it, but I'm sure I'll learn it.
Wow. Okay, mic drop number one. There may be a lot of mic drops here today. Um, Tell me about, let's just go down the list. Okay, so the resume. No,
Mhm,
we're not even gotten to the interview part. Okay, we're just on the resume. Tell
mhm.
us other things that people do, women do, that discount their qualifications or experiences on physical documents.
So, especially with women, I see a lot of descriptions of the job. It almost reads like a justification of the job. Look how busy I am. And some of that is necessary. So I have a really set template I like, which is, look, every organization is different, a different size, a different title. I cannot, as a recruiter, tell what you did. The director of operations at a $2 million organization is different than the director of business operations at a $6 million corporation. So I do need some description, but it's usually a lot more macro than I see in female leaders. Like I'm looking for, ran a 16-person team for a $2 million organization providing these services. And instead, it reads a lot like a laundry list of daily duties. And what I'm looking for there is, can you synthesize macro information for me so that I can digest it? And then I'm looking for key accomplishments. And most female leaders do not put key accomplishments. And I'm really looking for quantifiable metrics. I'm looking for numbers. Raised revenue by 25%, cut expenses by 13%, onboarded 6 new team members. They don't all have to do with revenue, although that's helpful in the C suite. But I really am looking for, what are the things that you're most proud of in the jobs? Um, Women also have a good slash bad habit of, was part of a team that did this. We did that. Our department did that. Took part in. There's, you know, there's a very limited space and a necessary space for humility in job applications, but I do mean limited and certainly not on your resume. So,
Interesting.
take credit and don't leave it to the interviewer to assume that you have done these things or accomplished those things. Another
Go,
huge
go, go.
mistake I see is that I don't, this is an era where we need different resumes for different jobs.
Okay.
So gone are the days where you can use the same resume to apply to different roles. You really need a tailored resume. If I'm looking for fundraising, I want to see it on your resume. If I'm looking for leadership or executive
Okay.
leadership, I'm looking for that on your resume. And then also, there's terrible advice out there about the one-page resume. Please don't do that. So we're talking about women with extensive leadership experience that cannot be condensed down. 20 years of leadership experience should not fit in one page. It shouldn't be six,
Mhm.
right? But it shouldn't be one. And so they're discounting themselves in multiple ways. They didn't take credit.
Yeah.
They read it like a laundry list and they only gave me one page.
Okay. Advice on pulling with grant applications, we pull the keywords and we tailor the grant. Is this the same where we should pull the key core criteria of the job description and then speak to it in different ways? Do you like to see that, Allison?
I do like to see that. So that's great advice to really look at the qualifications and pull those into your bullet points. So bullet points really are the pieces where you're talking about accomplishments. The qualifications are what we're looking for experience on.
Love that. Okay, I have more questions. Um, Ageism. Just as we're going to talk about young people not being perceived as experienced enough. I have also recently, being in the second half of my career, been talking a lot about ageism. And one of the suggestions somebody made was, "Well, just take your dates off the year you graduated from university, or whatever." And I have mixed feelings about that. Do you see ageism happening either on the new or the established leader? And how would you recommend people manage that? Or is it even to be managed?
I tend to agree about removing the dates um, from graduation for a number of reasons, not just the ageism, but I think credentialism is also very real. So
Oh.
I tend to want to remove the dates from it, both from a younger generation perspective and from an older generation perspective. But what you did, what you graduated with 25 years ago, does that really have to do with their last 20 years of work experience? And so, like, I don't want that to overshadow the
Mhm.
experience that you've had.
Mhm.
um, I want to see, so I like I said, just mentioned, I don't want to see a 6-page resume.
Okay.
So it's more about relevance. So my sweet spot is between 2 and 3 pages.
Okay.
I almost never want to see any experience past 20-ish years ago uh, on any resume, simply because it may not be relevant. If you were, a waitress 20 years ago, does it really matter if you're applying for a CEO role now? This is about relevance. It's also about acknowledging that recruiters have really short attention span. And it's something that we really have to actively, I have to time myself and
Mhm.
make sure I'm giving my each resume enough time where the dates really matter. The quickest thing that's actually going to disqualify you is not the date of your graduation, but the dates of your tenures. So I'm
Mhm.
looking for even employment experience. I'm looking for somebody that has proof of stability. The reason that people really used to put college dates on their application was because it proved that you could sit through something for 4 years. So once you have that 4 year experience pretty much anywhere, is it really relevant that you sat through 4 years of your
Yeah.
undergrad? Maybe. But what I'm trying to promote is really experience over credentialism.
Oh, this is like to the heart of things. I'm so lucky to have you to have ask these questions. So when you see a resume that has the hopping, right?
Mhm.
And there's a lot of reasons for this. And I just want to caveat, like talking to this audience, I want folks to know worked as a fundraising consultant for many years. Now I've stepped into coaching. But I always erred on the side of the fundraiser before I erred on the side of an alternate reality, because we all know that fundraisers are the glue. There's a lot of pieces that go into success for a fundraiser that aren't necessarily things we can control. I I caveat that with the fact that there are pieces of it which we can control, and this is not a way to create excuses for things to happen, because I don't know about you, I haven't ever found the perfect case for support, the perfect team members, the perfect board of directors, the perfect list of donors, and all that. But how do you, as a recruiter, okay, so see, you see this great resume, but it's got that hopping piece in it, less than 2 years, da-dink, da-dink, da-dink. How do you react to that, and how do you address it in your mind?
So I say this as a consultant myself, right? I made the move to consulting because I really love the building piece. And I know that I enjoy that. And some organizations need that.
Mhm.
So there are organizations where it's intentional. I'm actually fine with the hopping because the organization needs some foundational work, and we're fine with that person taking 2 to 3 years to really uh,
Mhm.
build that in. If it is a concern, I'll have a frank conversation with the individual. Hey, I see a lot of jumping on your resume. If it isn't brought up in the interview, I would advise women to bring it up. It is the elephant in the room,
Mhm.
and if you don't fill that narrative,
Mhm.
the recruiter will.
Mhm.
And so really, I know you see a lot of movement. I was really brought in on contract. If it's contract, denote that it's contract. If it is a shorter move, be honest about
Yeah.
that. Things do happen. There is no perfect placement, and people take jobs and they're not the right jobs, and that's
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
But I would just address it and get out in front of it. But it is not necessarily a deal breaker for me because sometimes I'm looking for builders. Now, an asterisk on that
Mhm.
is engagements less than 6 months. If you can leave it off your resume, do it. Unless it significantly adds. So I had somebody that had 6 months, as a chief of staff with a congressional leader. Okay, that's 6 months I'm going to keep on because it's such a big job.
Yeah.
But for the most part, 6 months wasn't a good fit. If it doesn't add to your resume, leave it off.
Along the same lines, what about experience that's not directly fundraising related, or for those of us that are trying to get into the not for profit space but have storied careers in the corporate space? How do you want to see that resume?
The best piece of advice that I ever received was around this exact piece. So I moved myself from for profit into nonprofit in 2008 when I was in real estate. Prior to that, and almost all of my experience had been volunteer. I had founded a nonprofit, I had run a number of events, and I listed it. Every resume is tailored. I listed that much higher as a chronological job. I was clear that it was volunteer,
Hmm.
but it was higher on my resume than my last 10 years that I had spent in real estate.
Yeah.
So we tend to be too modest about these things.
Yeah.
And so if you founded a nonprofit, if you chaired your preschool's dinner committee, if you run the HOA board, list it as a role and take full credit for
Hmm.
it. Because if not, you can actually walk the interviewer through your chronological history, but that'll get you past the door. So I would list them as jobs.
Very cool. I am so excited to hear that because I think we learn just as much from volunteer work and managing difficult personalities, might I say, than as at work ourselves.
Yeah.
Okay, so we put the resume in. We
Hmm.
make it to, I don't know what the rounds are like, but let's say there's a screening, I'm going to guess. There's a phone screening. Is that the way it's usually done?
They're all Zoom now, but
Oh,
yes,
there.
there's always a screening first.
Okay.
Yes.
Biggest turnoffs on a Zoom screening.
So biggest turnoffs on a Zoom screening, you don't have your camera and your angles and your lighting set up. This is too far. We've been doing this for too long for you to, frankly, do an interview from your kitchen or your couch. We're hiring C-suite
Yeah.
level executives,
Yeah.
and there are certain jobs that are more casual than others, but
Yeah.
technology as an inability is number one.
Deal breaker. A true story.
Yeah.
I had somebody one time. Oh, and by the way, nobody wants to look up your nose. So lift up your computer so we can see your eyes are at height. True story. I had somebody who showed up for a group call in a house coat. True
Hmm.
story.
Hmm.
It was an internal meeting, but still, I don't think anybody wants to. Yeah.
And just basic. Yeah, and a house coat. If you wouldn't do it in an in-person meeting, don't do it in a virtual meeting.
Okay.
So I've had candidates eat on camera.
Oh my
uh,
God, you're kidding.
No. I've had candidates whose cat walks across their screen the entire time. They just like don't acknowledge it. Um, I I've had candidates that are looking at other things, and they're clearly doing other things while they're interviewing.
Yeah.
So I mean, it feels basic, but so I'll say that my screeners are much tougher than I am. So my screener's job is to cut down my interview load. So there are usually at least three rounds, if not five.
Wow.
That first round, our cut rate is between 50 and 75%.
Mm-hmm.
So even though it's just a screening and you may think this is just a recruiter, this is just the hiring manager, they are tough.
Yeah.
So if
Yeah.
you're not hitting that, what you're really trying to do there, my screener is trying to do three things. One, prove that you're a real legitimate person who knows how to interact with another human. Easy, right? Number two, to verify your employment history. So they're going to walk you back through your employment history to make sure that your resume is what it looks like. And three, to verify qualifications. So they're going like almost line for line off the qualifications and seeing if you meet them. It's usually anywhere from 30 minutes to 60 minutes, depending on my screener. They're keeping pretty meticulous notes, and then they have to make a decision at the end of it. So, you know, that one is pretty straightforward, but they are at that moment looking to cull individuals. So this screening is really critical.
Yeah, CULL, not
Yeah,
CALL, right? So they're
right.
they're looking for reasons to eliminate you from the list, really, right?
Correct.
Yeah,
Yes, because the next rounds get harder and harder.
yeah.
And so they're really looking for people that'll be able to, put their best foot forward.
Yeah, so interesting. So interesting because, I can see how people think, well, I'm not really with the recruiter or whatever, but the
Mhm.
way you show up there sort of speaks a lot to the way you're going to show up future on. I'm guessing,
Yes.
Allison. Yeah.
Yeah, and I work with my recruiters day in and day out, and I take their recommendations
Yeah.
very seriously. We do go back through all the resumes and have conversations about why people were
Yeah.
eliminated. And there are candidates that I have just loved in, resume triage that my recruiter will say, no, they were really disrespectful. They were really, they were
Disorganized.
late. Yeah, they were
Yeah.
not paying attention. They answered several questions well, when I talk to the board, we can talk about that.
Yeah.
And we're, blatantly disrespectful
Yeah.
to our screeners. And,
Yeah.
you know, how you treat people in those moments speaks a lot to character. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, I take my screener's recommendation over almost everything else.
Hmm. So you make it through the screening. Congratulations. And you've got this date in person, hopefully, because, life happens, but it's in person. And you get a chance to be in the room with the people that might be hiring you and probably with a facilitator like yourself.
Mm-hmm.
I want to start with the positives this time because last time I started with the negative. So, what are the things you love to see when someone comes in a room?
We just had a conversation about this today, and the what we're looking for is calm, confident, and curious. So we're looking for I belong in this room.
Yep.
So that confidence. We're looking for uh, the calmness to accept questions, think about it, and then respond. And we're looking for curiosity, both about the role, but about themselves. So
Yeah.
we're looking for that piece of self awareness
Yeah.
that a candidate might show during the interview that's like, am I the right fit? Um, I think one of the things a lot of candidates that we hear from a lot of candidates over and over is, I'm the perfect fit for this role. And how could you know that? You can't know that without knowing the
Okay.
culture.
Yeah.
Would you even like this job?
Yeah.
Like, how do you know based on a website and a piece of paper that you're the perfect fit? And so we're looking for that little bit of curiosity that's like, well, what's the culture like? And,
Yeah.
what is the reporting structure and how will I be measured? So
Yeah.
we're looking for that piece of curiosity where the person is really contemplating
Yeah.
if it's the right fit for them.
It just struck me that we talk about authentic leadership all the time, but authentic interviewing,
Mhm.
right? Really showing up, which is way more risky because if you think of power dynamics, we know enough about power dynamics that the people interviewing are the ones with all the perceived power, at least. But maybe lifting that up a bit and shifting that in our own mindsets that we also need to come to those interviews as potential candidates with a list of criteria, important questions that need to be answered, uh, a, a dynamic and a style that fits. I mean, there's nothing worse in an interview when the interviewees are very formal and your natural style is very casual and comfortable and relatable, for example. And you can
Hmm.
see it right away. Somebody's got a chameleon here, Allison.
Right.
So, what do you recommend? Or let's use the example of exactly that. There's a formality to the process. Often I find in not for profits because we want to do due diligence, or nobody, the questions are all pre planned. We know that's sort of the new way of doing things. And you just need more casualness or comfortableness. Tell us what advice you'd have for that candidate.
So I say this as somebody who really excels in preparation. That I I will love to have a deck and an Excel, and I kind of come from the let me show you state, but it does read as very cold and formal,
There you
and
go.
people have a hard time connecting to that.
Yeah.
So the way that I work around that when I'm in interviews myself, because as a consultant, I'm still pitching for jobs, 50% of my time is that I often relate questions. So I ask questions. So a question might be, tell us about a time where you mentored an employee.
Yeah.
And so, if there's natural questions that come up, first of all, you're looking for that interaction. So, how many employees do you have? Or, is that something that's been part of this role? One, it shows that I'm listening to you and I'm engaged. And two, it gives me a little bit of time to formulate an answer. Now they're communicating back with me, and then so a few things. There's some visual cues that you can do.
Tell me. I
One,
want to know.
yes. So there's you really have to make sharp eye contact.
Okay.
You really have to lean forward,
Wow.
and usually there's a warmness to a tone where now I'm going to relate to you my experience. I want to tell you all about Tiffany. And I had a one like she and
Mm-hmm.
I ended up being great friends. And you're kind of inviting the interviewers into this scene with you. It is a change of tone. It is a warmness and connection. Interviews are tough. It's hard to see a nervous candidate when you're interviewing somebody who's nervous, you feel the edginess. When you talk to somebody who, even if they are nervous, is
Mm-hmm.
leaning forward and engaging you as if you already know them,
Mm-hmm.
it is disarming both for the
Yeah.
interviewer and for the
Yeah.
interviewee. They will return those visual
Yes.
cues. People will lean forward and smile. And that's really important. I think women also get in very much in presentation mode
Yeah.
and are not as good at reading the room.
Uh-huh.
So take a moment and read the facial responses as you are speaking. Also, slow down.
Yeah. I was waiting for that one.
Slow down.
Yeah. And even that little space we had just there, Allison, right? It's even when I do these podcasts, I think a lot about pacing. And as I get older, I think a lot more about communication and how we pace ourselves with what we say. And we have more people that don't speak English as a first language. We have more people who we're including. Our jobs as leaders are to build succinct statements and sentences and stories and examples in a way that brings people along. It is not the place to verbally diarrhea dump everything you've experienced under mentorship into one run on sentence, right?
Mhm.
So slowing down. Okay, I want to go back to reading the room. The irony of this for me is women are usually really good at personal relationships and reading the room, typically being the not underdog, but somebody who sees all things. What happens when they get in the room? What happens?
Imposter syndrome happens. These normally incredibly warm,
Warm.
accomplished, confident women leaders that are in the room suddenly start visibly wondering if they should be there.
Ooh.
And you can feel it. You can feel that they don't feel like they belong there. And so that comes through in the performance.
Oh my gosh. Oh, I just want to give them a big hug when that happens, though. Like, how do you handle that when you're the recruiter and you see somebody? How do you do that, Allison? How do you handle it?
So again, we were just talking about that this morning. We had a candidate that was uh, eminently qualified, but almost too exuberant in the
Mm,
interview.
yeah.
Just too much energy, too excitement. And the first question that somebody else on the panel asked was, "Well, is she really green?" It
Mm,
read as it read as somebody who was not confident about their leadership. No, this person actually has 20 years
mhm,
of experience. And so that imposter syndrome really takes over in that moment. And I struggle with this a lot
yeah,
as a leader. I don't always know if I belong in the room.
yeah,
I don't know, I've been a CEO a few times now. I've founded a nonprofit, I've been a board chair, and there's still that piece of me that just doesn't know if I should be in this room, and I hope you don't find me out. And so I will fill every available space with words so that you don't have time to think about it, right? And that's what I'm trying to do. Let me prove to you again and again and again and again why I belong in the room. But there's a confidence to
yeah.
saying, no, let me take my time
Mhm,
and let me answer this
mhm,
thoughtfully because, of course, I belong here because I have all the time in the room or all the time in the world. Clearly, I already have your attention. But
yeah.
female leaders start second guessing themselves the second they walk over that threshold.
Mm. This is so interesting. So I find one of the things I remind myself of, and I do this in podcasts too, is the reminder of the tennis game. The ball has to go back and forth. You can't have a tennis game by yourself. And so when you start thinking you're talking too much, you're probably talking too much. And I say that with love. It's typical human behavior when we're nervous or anxious. In my world, I fill the space with words, but this is just a habit. It's not who you are. And I just want people that are listening to say this is something we can address. So, what are some of the techniques for how to practice that, especially if you know you're that kind of person, Allison?
So it's really about being intentional when you respond.
Okay.
So it is an interviewer is going to not think twice if you take 2 to 5 seconds to process the question
Yeah.
and then answer succinctly. Also, be very intentional about avoiding filler words. So we jump in and we start to answer before our answer is clearly formulated. And we start saying things like, in other words, or at one time I did this, or in conjunction with. I can tell that those are filler words that you're like grasping for time. So a tactic
Yeah.
is take a second, build out a small framework in your mind of how you're going to answer, and
Yeah.
then succinctly deliver those. Also, again, facial cues, facial cues, facial cues. You can really tell that an interviewer is disengaged. The answer is not to keep talking.
Let's repeat it. When the interviewer is not engaged, the answer is not to keep talking.
No, a good interview is where the interviewer talks more than you.
Yeah.
And that seems really counterproductive, but it's not. What it is signifying is a confidence in you as a candidate that they're sharing more information with you.
Right.
But if the candidate has spoken so much that the interviewer gets in 2 questions in an hour,
Right.
you've talked too much, and
Yeah.
two, you're unlikely to move forward.
Yeah. Fascinating. When I work with folks to prepare for interviews, and I do a fair bit of that more and more, one of the things I often talk about is, and people don't like it, but practicing.
Hmm.
And this involves the practicing of knowing the strategic plan of the organization, to be able to pronounce the name of the organization, all that, taking a look at the org chart, taking a look at what their finances look like from the publicly available, just having I don't mean over preparing, but knowing enough that you feel like you're grounded in it. And then practicing answering some of these typical questions that always come up in interviews. Like they're going to ask you, What is it about this job that appeals to you?
Hmm.
So knowing, and I think the power of threes is a big one for me, right? One thing or three things, knowing ahead before you start talking that there's three talking points you want to get to, no more, no less. And maybe you throw in a bonus as you're talking. I tend to think on the fly as I'm talking. I might add in a bonus, but at least has an arc, Allison, or some sort of a
Hmm.
framework to the responses. Because as you move up, they are definitely assessing your ability to communicate effectively, succinctly, and um, cohesively.
Agreed 100%. And I would even go further than practicing, and that is practice aloud.
Yes, please.
Practice, speak as if you were answering, and speak like you have your mother sitting next to you. So when I first started consulting, a few times, like I would be working from my parents' house
Yeah.
sometimes, and I would have literally have my mom sitting on the other side, and she would say, do you know how many filler words that you use there? Do you know how unconfident you sounded? And for it's my mom, right? Moms are our
Yeah.
best friends in that way. But I
Ouch.
really yeah, but if she, she heard it, and I'm certain the interviewer heard it as well.
Yeah.
So when you are forced, like, most of us hate their voices, I hate my voice, so I don't tend to record it, but I do sit there with
Talk
the
through.
question and a
Yeah.
timer, and I don't like to speak more than a minute in response.
Wow. Wow. A minute.
1 minute.
Yeah. Yeah. I'd have to work on that one for sure. I get many, many, many ideas and they all conflict in my brain. Um, Physical stuff. So I believe, having done this work, a lot of it on Zoom, for a long time, I think a small thing that is such an easy fix is the raised shoulders. I find a
Mhm.
lot of women when they come into interviews, the first thing they do when they're trying to build rapport, if you're watching me on YouTube, I'm curling my shoulders up towards my ears to make themselves feel small. I'm not sure if they even know they're doing it. But the
Mhm.
minute they do that, besides looking like a troll, they diminish their physical space and they look less, what's the word, Allison? Reputable,
Mhm.
stable, confident. Help me out with the words.
Trustworthy.
Thank you.
Yeah, trustworthy, confident, I think, all of those things. And posture is really critical. Um, Dress is really critical. I am usually the best dressed person in the room. Part of that is, frankly, I am Latina, and
Mhm.
so the expectation, in for people of color, the bar tends to be not lower but higher.
Yeah.
So, um, dressing the part. So even in my own office, we have a blazer rule, which is, you must be wearing a blazer and an appropriate top at all times. You must
Yeah.
square your shoulders, sit in the middle of the frame, have good lighting, speak succinctly. So all of those things, and again, practice.
Yeah, for sure. That's interesting. It makes sense that the bar is higher. Um, have you, I just have to ask, what experiences have you had as a Latina woman that I might not have had as a white woman? Actually, that's a great question. And what could you share with our listeners that would be valuable to them to know, Allison?
So I think, uh, what I just shared is really important to know.
Yeah.
So I am Latina. I don't have a Latina last name. I took my husband's last name. So my maiden name is Rodriguez. And frankly, things have shifted much more for the better in the past, 10 years. But in the past, Allison Fuller definitely got more interviews than Allison Rodriguez, which is a sad commentary, but it's true. Uh, there is always a tiny cue of surprise, when I show up on camera. And because I am tenured in this and I've done this for a really long time, and I spent a good time in my formative career in mostly male spaces. Um, I'm very formal. So I will start off almost every communication as being formal. And the feedback I get on that with women of color, particularly, is that the criticism is that then they seem overly formal
Right.
or they seem cold.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
it is a really thin line to tread about. But then I've also gotten comments that my presentation was code switching. So certain times, leaders of color expect a certain kind of response. If my last name is Rodriguez,
Hmm.
or if you're hiring a black leader, they expect you to emote a certain culture. And if you don't, then you are accused of code switching. So it really is a delicate line to tread. I will tell you that my cadence is different in all black and brown spaces than it
Oh,
is in white
really?
spaces. Very
Yeah.
much.
That's so interesting. The what I take away from that is you knowing exactly what your box is and actively aspiring to that box. And I hope box doesn't sound like a negative. It's that the place you want to be, you articulate that place, you draw the box and you show up in the box so that somebody else doesn't define the box for you.
Correct. And I rarely walk into a meeting without having looked at what that that space is going to be like beforehand.
Yeah.
So if I'm going into an interview, I've almost always looked at the page, I've looked at people's LinkedIn profiles, I've
Yeah.
tried to get a gauge for who
Yeah.
they were and the language that they use
Yeah.
ahead
Yeah.
of time.
To
So I don't
adjust.
know. Yeah, I don't know what the white experience is because I'm
Yeah.
not.
Yeah.
But I do pay a lot of attention to
Yeah.
facial cues, to the makeup of the room, to nicknames, all of those things.
Interesting. Sidebar for our aspiring interviewees. This is something I've used, so I don't know if it will relate directly to your world, but I have one of my gifts is I think besides being incredibly curious, I think that my genuine enjoyment of people shows up most of the time, Allison. I genuine there's nothing insincere about me as far as people. I'd like to meet all of them. I wish I had more time in the world. So one of the little habits I have when I walk into a room that I don't know, and I do that a lot, whether it's a presentation, whether there's a bunch of people in front of me in person, anything like that, I assume, and this is going to sound so arrogant, that everybody likes me. I make this assumption that people are most likely going to like what I have to say until proven otherwise. And what it does for me is it drops my anxiety, it drops my worry, because that worry can actually take over for me and it lets me open up a little bit. I'm a typically open person. And I find what happens is because I don't have any inhibitions about who I am and how I'm showing up, people just kind of go with it. And the biggest problem for me is when I go to a Zoom call and I can't see anyone's face.
Right.
Because then I feel like I'm completely untethered. Because I am acknowledging, and this is interesting for me to say out loud, I'm actually looking at the faces, and I hate to say this, and this is going to be on a video, so I'm going to have to live with it for validation that
Sure.
I'm okay,
Of course.
right?
Yeah. And I think that's totally normal and intuitive.
Yeah,
But I think it's intuitive for you as somebody who likes people. So you do
yeah,
emit warmth,
yeah,
right? And curiosity and this general
yeah,
excitement. And you met my partner and he does too. Like
totally.
he is warm from the second that you meet
Yeah,
him. And that is a very much for people. I am not naturally in that space. For me, that's really been a learned skill. And
yeah,
it's such a
yeah,
critical one,
yeah,
that warmth, that it disarms humans. It invites them into the space with you.
yeah,
it
yeah,
it feels good. So I think that look for validation, it's so important.
yeah. It's I didn't realize that I was doing this until I got older and I had to teach it. Full disclosure. And it's funny because if you look at the sales research, and I know we're down a rabbit hole, but I don't care. If you look at the sales research, it talks about when you go in to sponsor something or you're looking to sell into a company, you're always looking for a sponsor, somebody who's going to be your advocate from inside. They teach this at sales school, right? And the thing is assuming people are on your side until proven otherwise is a known sales tactic.
Yes.
And And so, why not leverage what the research says to be more successful as women? I think that so. Okay, as I say that, I'm seeing the dark side of it. Do you want to take away the dark side from? Do you want to go with it? You look like you're going to say something.
No, I want to hear what you have to say, but then
Okay,
I do
so the
want to talk about
darks
sponsorship.
yeah, okay, so the dark side of it is, oh, she just wants me to like them. She doesn't have it. She's too nice, right? The double bind that women get find themselves. She's too nice. She couldn't possibly be a CEO because she's far too kind and compassionate. Which, if you know me, ambition and compassion, I believe those can coexist. Actually, they partner really nicely, but we don't have a lot of role models for that. So take it
Hmm.
away.
Uh, I think ambition and compassion do belong together, but we tend to believe a very black and white version of the female business leader. You are either cold, hard business leader, you don't have a family and you only care about profit, or you are the really nice, lady from HR that everybody loves and brings banana bread on Tuesdays. And it's really, really hard to balance that line. It is a stereotypical, businesswoman.
Yeah,
And but I do want to just step back for 1 second and talk about sponsorship versus mentorship,
please.
because that is a problem for women. Women take on mentors and not sponsors. One of the best gifts that I have is that I had a sponsor. I consider my partner my sponsor.
Yeah.
And the difference between a mentor and a sponsor is that it's the transactional relationship of a sponsor. Sponsors are investing in you. You
Mm-hmm.
should not feel any kind of hesitation asking a sponsor to put you up for a job, write you a letter of recommendation, back you in your endeavors. We don't ask that of mentors. And because we don't ask that of mentors as females, and I think there's a number of reasons why female leaders are uncomfortable taking on sponsors versus mentors, but we tend not to take that on. And so we can get up to this position and we might ask our mentor for advice on how we applied for this position or how we interview or how did they do it, but we stop short of saying, will you make a call?
Will you put
Will
in a
you?
good word for me?
And the piece is because, and I just heard this last week at Woke, because women are afraid of the transactional nature of that. And the transactional nature of a sponsorship is quid pro quo.
Right.
And women leaders are less confident in their ability to make good on their part of the quid pro quo. So they don't offer it, but they shouldn't be. It Men never question that they're going to be able to add value later. Men never question if I'll be able and in the position to help you if you help me. They don't question that. What I heard from female leaders in this space was, well, how long is the time commitment? Well, like how long am I going to be in the position to help them? What if I don't know anybody that knows them? Women go through this whole process where again they say no before they're even asked.
Yeah.
Whereas men are, of course, I'll help you when it's my turn to help you. Like it doesn't even
Right.
cross
It
their
doesn't even.
mind.
I'm
Yeah.
seeing this
So
like yes or no paradigm little Venn diagram where men go yes or no and women go let me see, right? Like this whole complicated. Boy, we talk in our heads to ourselves a lot, eh?
so much.
So much. So just to go back to this sponsorship mentorship, because I think that's a really great point. And some people, the term sponsor might be new. So mentorship, I always say is this is how I did it when I was in this role. Consulting is this is how you do it. Coaching is how would you like to do it? What's most important to you? And sponsorship is I'm going to work with you and I'm going to go to bat for you.
Mhm.
Correct?
Correct. Correct.
Wow. God,
And
imagine how strong you'd feel with that behind you, that wind behind you.
it's and I've been extremely lucky to have sponsors in both of my areas of expertise. So when I was in real estate, I had a boss that really acted as a sponsor, you know, took me on, taught me things, put me in rooms I would not otherwise have been in, and bet a little bit of their reputation on it. And having a partner too that I was new to the nonprofit space,
Yeah.
it is, I mean, there is a wind beneath your wings on it. There is that nagging perception of, oh, I really am here, I'm beholden to somebody else. But very quickly I found out how much I deserved to be in those rooms, and it dissipated very quickly. Also, I've been able to make good on that far more than I ever thought I was going to. I'm
Mm,
I live from a place of generosity.
mm,
Usually, actually, when I find that I'm a little worried about business or it's slow, my practice is usually to reach out and see how I can help others.
I agree.
And I'll reach out, and before I know it, right,
Yeah.
things have started to pick back up. So, because I think a lot of female leaders live from a place of generosity, I want to be able to help you. Let me know, how can I do this? Very quickly, that sponsorship, you're already doing it as a leader naturally. You're just not terming it that way. So if you think of it instead as leading from a place of generosity and assuming that the person that you're wanting to sponsor you is also leading from a place of generosity, it's much easier to think about than the transactional quid pro quo.
Yeah. Yeah, and I just like to send out a message to all of my listeners right now. It's okay to receive. I think we're really talking about how women are can be uncomfortable receiving. They're so good at helping. They are the caretakers, they are the nurturers, they are the person that keeps track of the weekly calendar. It's okay to receive help, right?
It's not just okay, it's expected. And
Yeah.
you should ask, 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 ask.
Yeah.
All they can say is no. And then you're in the same exact position that you are right now. We give no this huge power over us. What if they say no? Some of the best things that have happened to me have been rejections.
Mm.
They have been the wrong door, the wrong job, the wrong partnership, all of those things. I'm grateful for those no's in my life. So ask. All they can say is no. But I guarantee if you don't ask, 90% of the time they're not going to offer.
An amazing conversation. Allison, how can people get in touch with you?
Great question. So my website is envisionnonprofit.com, envision with an E, and my email, Allison, Allison, at envisionnonprofit.com.
Amazing. This has been such a gift to have these. It's funny, we started very typical, very practical, very action oriented. And then I feel like we got into this sort of this genuine discussion and this, I feel from you this desire to elevate the community. And I want to thank you for that and for sharing your wisdom with all of our listeners.
Thank you so much for having me. It's my pleasure.
Awesome. Goodbye, everybody, and go be great. 5 o'clock on the dot.
Perfect.